2012 may very well be the most important year for anime in modern history. Love it or hate it, Sword Art Online's premiere is probably the single most impactful anime to hit the Western market. Seo didn't invent the Isekai genre, but it set in stone both the formula and the tropes that would go on to define the genre for the next 7 years. And that's not particularly a bad thing. Many of the shows that I adore would have never made it if it weren't for Sword Art Online being the massive success that it was. Today, I want to speculate, particularly on another isekai by the same author that came out a meager 3 months before Sword Art Online did. I'm Manime Matt, and let's talk about what isekai almost was. Accel World is an isekai by Raki Kawahara. Coming out in 2012, I binged the show a couple months after completion, and honestly, I loved it. But there is no denying that it came quite early in my anime viewing career. So just a few weeks back, I suddenly remembered it for some reason and was wondering how it would hold up. I went into this show with some extremely low expectations, realizing who the writer was, waiting to be bombarded with constant tropes, and just understanding that it was probably going to be nostalgia alone that would power me through this rewatch. And luckily enough, I was extremely wrong. Now, I won't jump to conclusions and say Accel World is a masterpiece. The show suffers from many flaws. But what I found was, at the end of the day, not only an extremely enjoyable anime, but a show that tackled some difficult topics head on. In essence, it's a completely different kind of isekai. So before I talk further about Accel World, I want to establish some of the major themes that Sword Art Online embedded in the isekai genre. To put it as simply as humanly possible, escapism fantasy. Name an isekai anime in the past 7 years where the other world is not a fantasy setting, the protagonist isn't given some unfair advantage, and also there are some consequences in the other world that directly affects the real world in some way. I mean, it's nearly impossible. You could debate only, quite ironically enough, Sword Art Online, but that's about it. Almost every show that pulls inspiration from Sword Art Online almost always takes these 3 plot points. Just a quick list: Slime, Shield Hero, No Game No Life, Overlord, Log Horizon, ReZero, Konosuba, How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, Master of Ragnarok, Smartphone, Death March to a Parallel World. Yeah, look, I think you get the point. So that's what I want to talk about today. Instead of SAO being the show that defined the genre, what would have happened if instead the genre was built off of Accel World? So, of course, let's talk about Accel World. So a quick synopsis of Accel World. The show stars Haru, a chubby middle school student who lives in the future. Everyone wears computers around their necks that directly plug into their brain and is basically used for everything. Haru is brought into the accelerated world by a mysterious senpai. It's a VR fighting game that greatly slows down time and can be used as a way to get an edge on anyone who doesn't have the same powers. The first major difference is our protagonist Haru. When we first meet him, he is a complete loser. He is constantly bullied. He has some serious issues with the way he perceives himself, and his only 2 friends are now dating and hates the thought that he's basically always the third wheel. It's depressing. He has no drive, and he's constantly using VR games to escape all of his real-world problems. Even when this mysterious senpai reaches her hand out to him, he fights back at first, assuming it's some sort of elaborate prank. He's a heavily flawed protagonist, misunderstanding situations not for a lack of knowledge or conveniently left out bits of information, but because he hates himself so much it blurs his vision, or he inherently distrusts anyone who's not his 2 childhood friends. Accel World changes Haru for the better. It challenges his character in some extremely clever ways. In Accel World, you don't get a choice when building your avatar. Your avatar and movesets are formed by your subconscious. It takes your fears, your hopes, and of course your biggest trauma, and turns it into a weapon. Haru wants to escape his current life, so he got wings. The mysterious senpai doesn't like people getting close to her, so her body is made of blades. And Chiyu just wants to go back to when the three of them were all super close, so she got the ability to turn back time. But what's amazing about Accel World is how it challenges these characters to change. In order to get stronger in this world, you must learn to conquer your biggest fears. In order for Haru to win fights, he's often forced to take enemies head on. Literally, one of his biggest finisher moves is a headbutt. This is all despite the fact that he is the only character in the game who could quite literally just fly away. Yet the game forces Haru to charge into combat. This is the same for just about every character. Each one must take on their mental scars and grow from them. The incarnate system builds on this idea even further. Instead of just being a generic power-up through willpower, it derives its strength by intentionally overexposing yourself to your biggest fears. Haru is only able to learn how to use the incarnate system after his wings have been forcefully ripped from him. He has them stolen with almost no hopes of ever getting them returned. In truth, it was the only thing that made him special. To learn how to use the incarnate system, he has to accept that he may never get his wings back, but must still push himself and face his fears head on. This world building is an extremely clever way to develop characters. A large portion of this show focuses on Haru's self-acceptance. In Accel World, he learns that he is the only player who can fly, and it makes him much more confident in himself. But through the clever introduction of incarnation training, it teaches Haru that he can still love himself, even if he's lost all that made him special. It's a bit difficult to believe that this is in fact Raki Kawahara who wrote this. Another major difference between Accel World and modern Isekai is the real world. Now don't get me wrong, they spend a ton of time in the accelerated world, but often situations that occur in the real world affect the accelerated world and vice versa. In other words, there are actual consequences for their decisions. Many of the arcs start by other players hunting down our protagonist in the real world and forcing him into different kinds of situations. Sometimes the characters merely want his help, but other times they use real-world blackmail to get what they want in the accelerated world. The two worlds are heavily connected, and as the characters develop in the accelerated world, they change in the real world as well. Taku at first is this cool-headed, slick person who always knows exactly what to say to Haru and Chiyu. But as he develops in the accelerated world, he learns to drop his little act and actually depend on his friends. Accel World was a much more personal story than I had expected. All of the characters have these deep character arcs and have to face their problems in order to grow stronger. For a show about another world, it's extremely well grounded in their reality. All of this on top of the clear love and care that was put into this show makes it one of the most unique isekai I've ever seen. There are so many little background gags, gorgeously animated scenes, and even the amazing soundtrack. Just the melancholic feel of the songs that slowly grow stronger and stronger over time, I can't help but hold this anime dear to my heart. There is just so much care put into this show, and its messaging is so powerful. It's by no means a perfect show, I want to make that clear. Of course, our protagonist seems to have literally any girl he meets fall in love with him for no reason, and of course, there are some scenes that are extremely overdramatic. But I just love the idea of imagining how different Isekai would have been if only it had been Accel World that had gotten 3 seasons and a spin-off. Would modern Isekai use their world building as a way to force change in their characters? Maybe they'd make the world affect them mentally, forcing them to do horrible things in that world and have to return back to the regular world and deal with the mental scars of what they had to do. Maybe it would be less about a simple power fantasy and more about improving yourself in the real world. Maybe Isekai would be much more grounded in the real world. Instead of simple escapism to another world with almost no chances of ever returning, maybe it's a place they visit often and have to deal with the consequences of what they did in the other world in the real world. Possibly, can we just see something less fantasy-ridden? Fantasy almost always means going to the past and having an unfair intelligence advantage. Even if that's not the case, maybe have shows where the character doesn't start with an inherent advantage over everyone, and maybe everyone is on equal grounds. Maybe Isekai would focus much more on the development of the characters in the show instead of the world building itself, or just have them coincide. Is it too much to ask for some genuine care to be put into these anime instead of reusing the same recycled tropes over and over to the point where the characters just mindlessly accept that they are in another world for potentially the rest of their lives? I don't know, but there just seems like there are so many different possibilities with how Isekai could be handled, but yet we are always stuck on the exact same thing: escapism fantasy. And I feel like in some messed up way, we all chose that ourselves by constantly worshiping these same template shows that are easy to consume and make us feel safe. But I think, just like Haru had to learn throughout Accel World, simply flying away from our own problems is never the answer. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm obviously extremely passionate about this. Accel World went from being a show that I liked a lot back in the day to being one of my all-time favorite anime after my rewatch. Like, legitimately, I was expecting to rewatch this anime and just kind of trash it and think it was gonna be crap, and then, like, obviously that is not how it worked out. Well, a huge thank you to my patrons. You guys are my heroes. Speaking of which, if you want to see how I edit, join our exclusive Discord, or simply support the channel, feel free to join me on Patreon. Make sure you guys share, like, comment, and subscribe. This is Manime Matt. Make sure you guys say man and go watch that goddamned anime.